Your fancy winter jacket? Your backup generator? Useless if they fail. Over 1,000 years ago, Vikings conquered minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit nights, endless ocean voyages, and brutal winters without a single modern tool. The Norse weren't just warriors. They were master survivalists who thrived in conditions that would cripple today's best-equipped preppers. No batteries, no insulation, no modern tech, just raw ingenuity, centuries of trial and error, and solutions so effective modern science is still catching up. Today, we're uncovering 20 Viking survival methods that could save your life in a winter emergency or completely change how you think about self-sufficiency. Animal hide, windbreaks, portable shelter systems. When Vikings needed to travel during winter or work outside their homes, they didn't just endure the wind, they blocked it using portable windbreak systems made from animal hides and wooden frames. These weren't permanent structures, but temporary shelters that could be quickly assembled wherever protection was needed. The frame systems were ingeniously designed for portability, lightweight wooden poles that could be disassembled into compact bundles and carried by a single person. The joints used leather lashings or wooden pins that could be assembled without tools. Large hides from cattle, horses, or even seals were stretched over these frames to create wind barriers around work areas, temporary camps, or outdoor fires. The hide selection was crucial. Thicker hides provided better wind protection, but were heavier to transport, while thinner hides were more portable, but less effective in extreme conditions. The hides were often treated with animal fat to make them more wind and water resistant. This treatment process involved rubbing rendered fat into the hide fibers, creating a natural waterproofing that also increased flexibility in cold temperatures. Some Vikings used pine tar mixed with fat for even better weather resistance. The effectiveness came from understanding wind chill physics. Even a partial windbreak can reduce effective temperature by 10 to 20 degrees, making the difference between dangerous cold and manageable conditions. Vikings positioned these barriers to deflect prevailing winds while creating calm microclimates where they could work, eat, or rest. The positioning strategy was sophisticated. Vikings understood how wind patterns changed around obstacles and positioned their windbreaks to create maximum protection with minimum materials. They often used natural features like rocks or trees as anchor points, extending the effective protection area while reducing the amount of hide and framework needed. Some windbreak systems included multiple panels that could be arranged in different configurations depending on wind direction and protection needs. L-shaped arrangements provided corner protection, while circular arrangements created completely enclosed work areas. The modular design allowed customization for specific situations. Modern outdoor enthusiasts use the same principle with synthetic materials, but the concept remains unchanged. Emergency shelters, hunting blinds, and mountaineering windbreaks all follow the Viking model of portable, adjustable wind protection. Military field manuals still teach windbreak construction as a fundamental cold weather survival skill. The portability was crucial for Viking lifestyle. These windbreaks could be disassembled, transported, and rebuilt wherever needed. For a culture that relied on travel, trade, and seasonal work, having portable weather protection was essential for winter survival. Archaeological evidence shows these systems were used everywhere, from temporary fishing camps to construction sites for permanent buildings. Strategic wool layering, the original base layer system. Long before modern outdoor gear companies invented moisture-wicking base layers, Vikings had perfected the art of strategic clothing systems using nothing but wool and animal hides. The Viking layering system started with a thin, rough woven wool tunic worn directly against the skin. This base layer was deliberately loose-fitting to trap warm air while allowing moisture to move away from the body. The rough texture actually helped with moisture management. The coarse fibers created air channels that moved perspiration away from skin contact points. Over this came a heavier wool tunic, often with tighter weaving for wind resistance. The weave pattern mattered enormously. Loose weaves for insulation, tight weaves for wind protection. Vikings controlled every aspect of this process, from breeding sheep for specific wool qualities to adjusting spinning techniques for different garment purposes. On the coldest nights, they added thick wool cloaks or fur-lined outer garments, secured with metal brooches that could be adjusted for ventilation. These brooches weren't just decorative. They were functional ventilation controls that allowed precise temperature regulation. Too warm? Loosen the brooch. Getting chilled? Tighten it up. Here's the genius part. Even when soaking wet, wool retains about 80% of its insulating properties. This meant Vikings could get caught in freezing rain or snow and still survive the night. The lanolin, natural sheep oil, in wool provided water resistance, while the fiber structure maintained insulation even when saturated. Vikings also understood wool's natural antimicrobial properties. Lanolin inhibits bacterial growth, meaning wool garments could be worn for extended periods without developing dangerous odors or infections, crucial when bathing was infrequent during winter months. The leg protection system was equally sophisticated. Wool leggings were tied with leather strips in specific patterns that provided compression for better circulation while maintaining flexibility for movement. Some Vikings wore multiple layers of leg coverings with thin wool against the skin and thicker, wind-resistant outer layers. Modern military and outdoor research has confirmed that wool remains one of the most effective cold-weather materials ever discovered. Unlike synthetic fabrics, wool naturally regulates temperature, resists odor, and maintains insulation when wet. Special Forces units and Arctic researchers still rely on merino wool-based layers for exactly the same reasons Vikings chose wool a millennium ago. The Viking cloak deserves special mention. These weren't just outer garments, they were survival tools. At night, cloaks doubled as blankets, ground covers, or emergency shelters. The rectangular design allowed them to be wrapped, folded, or shared between multiple people as conditions demanded. Some cloaks were large enough to shelter 2 adults completely. The Eternal Ember, Viking fire preservation systems. The Vikings understood something modern survivalists have completely forgotten. The most reliable fire isn't the one you start, it's the one you never let die. While we fumble with waterproof matches and butane lighters that fail in cold weather, Norse travelers developed sophisticated ember preservation systems that could keep fire alive for weeks during brutal ocean voyages and overland expeditions through hostile territory. Using hollow bird bones, specially prepared reeds, or carved wooden tubes, Vikings would insert glowing embers from their hearth fires. Then seal both ends with pine resin mixed with beeswax. The limited oxygen inside created a controlled smolder that could last for extraordinary periods. Some historical accounts from Icelandic sagas mention embers staying alive for over a month during winter expeditions. Viking longships carried multiple fire vessels, each containing embers from different wood types chosen for specific purposes. Oak embers burned slow and steady, perfect for long voyages. Birch provided quick ignition when rapid fire was needed. Pine offered waterproof resin for sealing and created aromatic smoke that repelled insects. When they reached new shores after weeks at sea, Vikings could have cooking fires blazing within minutes, no matter how wet or windy the conditions. The most sophisticated Viking fire preservation systems included backup vessels and rotation schedules. Ship crews would maintain 3 or 4 ember containers simultaneously, checking them daily and transferring embers between vessels to ensure at least one remained viable. They understood that redundancy meant survival. If one ember died, others would continue. Modern preppers spend fortunes on waterproof matches, fire starters, and emergency fire kits that eventually run out or fail when you need them most. The Viking system created a truly renewable resource. As long as you maintained the ember with occasional feeding of small tinder, you had guaranteed fire. It's like having a flame that never needs replacement fuel, only patience and the ancient knowledge that we've completely abandoned in our disposable modern world: smoke alchemy, beyond meat preservation. While modern preppers think of smoking as just a way to preserve meat for a few weeks, Vikings developed complete smoke preservation ecosystems that transformed everything from grains to medicine to textiles into long-lasting resources. Their smokehouses weren't single-purpose buildings. They were multi-level preservation laboratories that could process dozens of different materials simultaneously. Viking smoke chambers used carefully engineered temperature zones for different materials, like having multiple ovens in one structure. Hot smoke near the bottom, reaching temperatures of 200 to 250 degrees, preserved fish and meat by cooking and dehydrating simultaneously. Medium smoke in the middle zone, around 100 to 150 degrees, treated grains and prevented insect infestation without cooking them. Cool smoke at the top, barely warm, enhanced medicinal herbs and made them more potent without destroying their active compounds. They discovered that juniper smoke created an invisible protective barrier around stored grains that weevils and moths wouldn't cross, a natural pesticide that required no chemicals. Barley and wheat, treated with specific wood smokes, could last years longer than untreated stores, sometimes remaining viable for over a decade. Even their wool clothing was smoke-treated to repel insects and resist moisture, a natural waterproofing system that made their garments last longer and perform better in harsh weather. The most remarkable aspect was their deep understanding of smoke chemistry, developed through generations of experimentation. Different woods produced different preservation compounds with specific properties. Birch smoke enhanced certain medicinal properties in herbs, actually increasing their healing potency. Oak smoke created natural antibiotic compounds that prevented spoilage. Pine smoke provided waterproofing agents that penetrated deep into materials. Vikings also understood timing and seasonal variations in smoke preservation. Spring smoke, when sap was rising, had different properties than winter smoke. They knew which woods to harvest when, how to dry them for optimal smoke production, and how to combine different smoke types for maximum preservation effect. Modern science is only now discovering the complex chemistry behind what Vikings knew through careful observation and practical application over centuries of survival necessity. Stonepacked hearths, thermal mass heating. You can't tend a fire while you're sleeping, but you can make the stones do the work for you. Vikings solved the overnight heating problem with one of the most elegant thermal solutions ever devised, turning their hearthstones into massive heat batteries. Every Viking home featured a central fire pit lined with carefully selected flat stones. The stone selection process was crucial. They needed rocks that could withstand repeated heating and cooling without cracking. Granite, sandstone, and certain volcanic rocks were preferred for their thermal properties and durability. During evening hours, they maintained roaring fires that heated these stones until they glowed with stored thermal energy. The heating process took 2 to 3 hours of intense burning, but the payoff lasted all night. When bedtime arrived, the fire was banked down or allowed to die, but the superheated stones continued radiating warmth for 6 to 8 hours. The physics behind this are simple but brilliant. Stone has high thermal mass, meaning it absorbs large amounts of heat energy and releases it slowly over time. A properly heated stone hearth could maintain livable temperatures throughout the coldest nights, while using a fraction of the firewood required to keep an active fire burning. Vikings optimized this system by arranging stones in specific patterns that maximized heat absorption and distribution. Larger stones were placed at the fire's center for maximum heat storage, while smaller stones around the perimeter provided more immediate heat release. The arrangement created a gradient of heat release timing that extended warmth throughout the night. Some Vikings took this concept further, removing heated stones and placing them in ceramic containers, or wrapping them in leather to create portable heaters. These bed warmers were placed under sleeping furs, or carried to warm specific areas of the home. It was the medieval equivalent of a hot water bottle, but more effective and longer lasting. The safety protocols were sophisticated too. Vikings developed techniques for handling red-hot stones using wooden tongs, leather wrappings, and specialized tools that prevented burns while maximizing heat transfer. They understood the danger of thermal shock and developed gradual heating and cooling procedures that prevented stone cracking. Archaeological evidence shows some Viking hearths included elaborate stone arrangements with channels and chambers designed to optimize heat flow and storage. These weren't random rock piles. They were engineered thermal systems that maximized efficiency while minimizing fuel consumption. This technique is experiencing a major revival in modern sustainable building. Masonry heaters and thermal mass stoves use the exact same principle. Burn hot fires for short periods to heat stone or ceramic mass, then let that mass radiate heat for hours. Modern versions can heat entire homes with just 2 to 3 hours of burning per day, achieving 80 to 90% efficiency compared to 15 to 20% for conventional fireplaces. Sealed clay pot food storage, medieval meal prep. Imagine it's February in medieval Iceland. Snow is chest deep, hunting is impossible, and your family needs to eat. If you were Viking smart, your dinner was already prepared and waiting, sealed months ago in buried clay pots using preservation techniques that modern science has proven nearly foolproof. Vikings developed sophisticated food storage systems using large ceramic vessels sealed with layers of animal fat or beeswax. The pottery itself was specially designed for food storage, with thick walls, narrow necks, and smooth interior surfaces that prevented bacterial growth. The clay was often mixed with organic materials like straw or dung that created microscopic air pockets for insulation. The sealing process was an art form. Cooked meats, stews, and preserved foods were packed into these pots while hot, eliminating air pockets that could harbor bacteria. Then came the crucial sealing layer, melted animal fat, usually from pigs or cattle, that was poured over the food while liquid, creating an airtight barrier as it cooled and hardened. This method worked because it eliminated the three enemies of food preservation: air, moisture, and temperature fluctuation. The fat seal prevented oxidation and contamination, while the underground storage maintained consistent near-freezing temperatures. The ceramic walls provided additional insulation and protection from rodents and other pests. Vikings understood the importance of fat selection for sealing. Different animal fats had different melting points and preservation qualities. Pork fat was preferred for its stability and neutral flavor, while beef fat was used for longer-term storage due to its higher melting point. Some Vikings mixed different fats to achieve optimal sealing properties. The burial process was equally sophisticated. Storage pits were dug below the frost line, lined with stones for drainage, and covered with layers of earth and organic matter for insulation. Some sites included multiple chambers for different types of food, with elaborate drainage systems to prevent water infiltration. When it was time to eat, they'd carefully excavate the pot, crack open the hardened fat seal, and remove the preserved food. The fat wasn't wasted. It was often reused for cooking or lamp fuel. The food inside remained fresh, flavorful, and safe to eat after months of storage. Modern food scientists recognize this as an early form of vacuum sealing, combined with controlled atmosphere storage. The fat layer not only preserved the food, but added crucial calories, essential when people were burning extra energy just trying to stay warm. A single sealed pot could feed a family for days during the worst winter storms. Contemporary preppers and off-grid homesteaders have adapted this technique using mason jars and modern sealing methods, but the core principle remains unchanged. Eliminate air, control temperature, and create barriers against contamination. It's still one of the most reliable long-term food storage methods available, requiring no electricity or special equipment. Living fortresses, the Viking hedge defense system. Long before barbed wire or electric fencing, Vikings created something far more ingenious: living barriers that provided protection, food, and medicine while growing stronger and more formidable every year. These weren't simple fences or basic hedgerows. They were carefully engineered ecosystems designed for total self-sufficiency and multi-generational defense. The technique, called hedge laying, involved partially cutting young trees and shrubs about 1/3 through the trunk, then bending and weaving them horizontally while they were still alive. As they healed over months and years, these plants grew both upward and outward, creating impenetrable walls that couldn't be easily cut, burned, or breached. Vikings deliberately chose plants that served multiple purposes beyond just defense. Hawthorn and blackthorn provided the primary defensive structure with their vicious thorns that could tear through leather and cloth, while apple, pear, and nut trees were interwoven to provide food throughout the growing season. Elder and willow were incorporated for their medicinal properties: elder for immune support, and willow for pain relief. The result was a security system that fed you, healed you, and became more formidable with time, instead of degrading like modern fencing. These living fortresses included sophisticated design features that modern security systems lack. Hidden gaps, known only to community members, served as emergency exits that could be quickly sealed with thorny branches when danger approached. Some Viking settlements had hedge systems so complex they channeled wildlife into specific hunting corridors, bringing deer and other game directly to the village perimeter, where they could be easily harvested. The maintenance of these living walls became a community activity that strengthened social bonds while improving defenses. Annual cutting and weaving, always done in winter when a sap was down, kept the hedges dense and growing in optimal patterns. Children learned the techniques by helping adults, ensuring knowledge passed to the next generation. For modern homesteaders, spending thousands of dollars on fencing that eventually rots, rusts, or fails, this Viking innovation offers something revolutionary: protection that grows stronger, not weaker, while providing food and medicine for generations. The initial investment was just time and knowledge, resources that multiplied rather than depleted with use. If you are enjoying Raiding the Past with us, then give a nod to your inner Viking, pillage that like button, and subscribe for more journeys into Midgard living, communal body heat sharing, human heating systems. Sometimes the most effective survival technology is other people. Vikings understood that human bodies are essentially 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit space heaters, and they organized their sleeping arrangements to maximize this free heat source. Viking families slept together on wide wooden platforms or benches built along the walls of their homes. These weren't individual beds. They were communal sleeping areas where multiple family members shared body heat under layers of wool blankets and animal furs. The platforms were often raised off the ground to avoid cold air that settled at floor level. The sleeping arrangements were strategically organized. Adults with the highest body heat production were positioned at the center, with children and elderly family members placed between them for maximum warmth transfer. Pregnant women and nursing mothers received priority positioning in the warmest spots. Hide curtains or woolen flaps could be drawn around the sleeping area to trap warm air and create a microclimate several degrees warmer than the rest of the house. These enclosures created what modern survival experts call micro-environments, small spaces where body heat could accumulate and be retained efficiently. On longship voyages, Vikings took this concept even further. Archaeological evidence shows they used shared sleeping bags called hudfat, with 2 warriors per bag specifically to conserve body heat during cold nights at sea. These weren't about comfort, they were about survival. The shared bags were made from multiple animal hides sewn together with waterproof seams. The science behind this is straightforward but powerful. The average human body produces about 100 watts of heat at rest, roughly equivalent to a bright light bulb. Multiple bodies in close proximity create a cumulative warming effect, while shared blankets trap and concentrate that heat. The larger the group, the more efficient the system becomes. Vikings also understood the importance of clothing during communal sleeping. They often slept in their wool undergarments, which continued providing insulation while allowing body heat to be shared effectively. Removing outer layers prevented overheating while maintaining the base insulation layer. The psychological benefits were as important as the physical ones. Communal sleeping created a sense of security and community that helped reduce stress and anxiety during harsh winter months. This psychological comfort actually improved sleep quality, which was crucial for maintaining health and immune function during challenging conditions. Modern military units, mountaineering expeditions, and emergency survival training still teach body heat sharing as a critical cold weather technique. Hypothermia victims are routinely treated using skin-to-skin contact with warm rescuers, proving that this 1,000-year-old Viking method remains medically sound today. Rotating night watch systems, 24-hour fire management. The difference between life and death on a Viking winter night often came down to one thing: keeping the fire alive. Vikings solved this challenge with a low-tech but highly effective system. They took turns staying awake to tend the hearth throughout the night. This wasn't just about fire management, though that was crucial. Night watch rotations served multiple survival functions: maintaining heat, monitoring for threats like wolves or raiders, checking on livestock, and responding to emergencies like roof collapses from heavy snow. The watch system created 24-hour awareness that dramatically improved survival odds. The rotation schedules were carefully planned based on household size and individual capabilities. In a typical family, adults would take 2 to 3 hour shifts, with the strongest and most experienced taking the coldest pre-dawn hours when fires burned lowest and threats were highest. Even children were trained to manage fires briefly while adults rested, though they were never left alone during the most dangerous hours. Fire management during night watch involved specific techniques that maximized heat output while conserving fuel. Watchers learned to read the fire's condition by sound, smell, and the quality of light it produced. They knew how to bank coals for steady heat, when to add fuel for maximum efficiency, and how to revive dying embers without wasting precious firewood. The watch rotation also included livestock monitoring. Animals were often kept in the same buildings as humans, and their health directly affected family survival. Night watchers checked for signs of illness, distress, or predator threats that could devastate food sources and heat production. Weather monitoring was another crucial responsibility. Night watchers tracked wind direction, temperature changes, and precipitation that could affect the home's structural integrity or create emergency situations. They knew the warning signs of dangerous weather patterns and could wake the family for emergency preparations. Modern survival experts and Arctic researchers still use rotating watch systems during extreme conditions. Military cold weather training emphasizes the same principle: shared responsibility for fire maintenance and group safety. It's a proven method for maintaining both physical warmth and psychological morale during extended cold exposure. The psychological benefits were as important as the physical ones. Knowing someone was always alert and responsible created a sense of security that helped everyone sleep better during their off-duty hours. It transformed individual survival into community survival, dramatically improving everyone's chances. Waterproof without plastic, Viking friction glaze. Long before Gore-Tex, synthetic coatings, or petroleum petroleum-based waterproofing. Vikings developed waterproofing technology so effective they could stay completely dry in North Atlantic storms, using materials modern survivalists walk past every day without recognition. Their friction glaze system created waterproof materials that were actually superior to many modern alternatives. The Viking friction glaze process began with collecting specific tree resins, usually pine, spruce, or birch, during particular seasons when resin content was highest. These were heated carefully to specific temperatures and mixed with rendered seal fat, whale oil, or other animal fats, plus beeswax in precise proportions that varied by intended use. The mixture was then cooled into a workable paste with the consistency of thick honey. The genius was in the application technique that gave the process its name. Rather than simply coating fabric or leather like modern waterproofing, Vikings used vigorous friction to transform the material at a molecular level. The paste was rubbed into the material for hours, sometimes by multiple people working in shifts, generating heat that opened the fibers and allowed the mixture to penetrate completely through the material. Once the friction process was complete and the material cooled, it became remarkably waterproof while remaining breathable, something modern synthetic waterproofing still struggles to achieve consistently. Rain would bead and roll off like water on a duck's back, but sweat and moisture from inside could still escape, preventing the clammy feeling common with modern rain gear. Viking sea cloaks, treated with friction glaze, could shed water for years with only occasional reapplication. Their ship sails, treated with similar techniques, could handle months of ocean spray, driving rain, and salt water without degrading or losing effectiveness. Even their leather boots and bags became completely waterproof while remaining flexible in freezing temperatures. The most sophisticated versions included carefully chosen additives that enhanced performance. Crushed charcoal provided UV protection for materials exposed to intense sunlight. Specific mineral powders maintained flexibility in extreme cold. Certain herbs repelled insects and prevented rot. Each region developed specialized formulas based on local materials and environmental challenges, a completely self-sufficient system requiring no factories, chemicals, or global supply chains. Sound maps. Viking acoustic navigation. Before compasses, GPS, or even reliable maps, Vikings developed a navigation system modern sailors have completely forgotten. Acoustic wayfinding that used the sound environment to determine precise location, direction, weather patterns, and even the presence of land beyond the horizon. This wasn't primitive guesswork. It was sophisticated environmental reading that modern science is only beginning to understand. Viking navigators learned to read the acoustic landscape like a detailed map that provided information no visual system could match. The echo pattern of a horn blast could reveal the presence of fjords, mountains, or cliff faces miles away. The way wind sounded through different terrain indicated elevation changes, forest density, and even soil composition. The sound of their own footsteps on different surfaces provided navigation information about terrain type, moisture content, and elevation. During ocean voyages, Vikings used sound to detect land long before it was visible, sometimes from distances of 20 miles or more. Experienced navigators could identify the direction of coastlines by how bird calls carried across water, determine the size of approaching land masses by acoustic signatures that bounced off different geographical features, and even estimate the depth of water beneath their ships by the way sounds traveled through the hull. In fog, darkness, or blizzard conditions, when visual navigation failed completely, sound became the primary navigation sense. Vikings would create specific noises, horn calls with particular patterns, wood striking metal in coded sequences, or coordinated shouts from multiple crew members, then read the returning echoes to avoid dangerous terrain, find safe harbor, or maintain course toward their destination. The most skilled Viking navigators could predict weather changes hours before any visual signs appeared. Certain shifts in how distant sounds carried, the way bird calls echoed, how wind noise changed pitch, or how their own voices sounded in the air, signaled specific weather patterns with remarkable accuracy. This knowledge was critical when shelter needed to be found quickly on hostile seas or dangerous coastlines. Vikings also used sound for communication across vast distances. Specific horn calls could carry messages between ships or settlements miles apart, using natural acoustic properties of landscapes to amplify and direct sound. They understood how different weather conditions affected sound travel and adjusted their communication accordingly. Turf-covered longhouses, nature's ultimate insulation. The Vikings didn't fight winter, they buried themselves in it. When temperatures plummeted across Iceland, Greenland, and northern Scandinavia, Viking families retreated into homes that were literally made from the earth itself. These weren't simple wooden cabins. Viking longhouses featured walls up to 3 feet thick, constructed with layers of stone, timber, and then packed with turf. a mixture of dirt, moss, grass, and organic matter. Imagine living inside a giant livable hill, because that's essentially what these structures were. The construction process was labor-intensive but brilliant. Vikings would first build a timber frame, then stack stones for the foundation walls. Next came the crucial turf layer, cut in rectangular blocks like giant bricks. These pieces were carefully fitted together with the grass side facing inward to prevent erosion. The roof received the same treatment, creating a completely earth-covered structure that looked like a natural hillside. Modern thermal engineering has proven why this worked so brilliantly. Turf provides an R value, insulation rating, of about R1 per inch, meaning those 3-foot walls delivered roughly R36 insulation, comparable to modern energy-efficient homes. The organic materials trapped air pockets, while the earth mass absorbed heat during the day and slowly released it at night. Inside, there was no wasted space. Humans, livestock, and stored food all shared the same area. While this might sound uncomfortable, every warm body, whether human or animal, contributed precious BTUs to the overall temperature. It was like having multiple space heaters running 24/7, powered entirely by body heat. The animal's body heat alone could raise interior temperatures by 10 to 15 degrees. Archaeological evidence from sites like L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland shows these structures maintained interior temperatures around 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, even when outside temperatures dropped to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The thick walls also provided excellent sound dampening, creating quiet interior spaces despite howling winter winds outside. Today, turf building is experiencing a renaissance among eco-builders and off-grid enthusiasts who want maximum insulation without synthetic materials. Modern turf houses in Iceland and Norway regularly maintain comfortable indoor temperatures, even when it's minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside, using minimal additional heating. Some contemporary builders report heating costs 70% lower than conventional construction. The human database, Viking knowledge networks. Before books, written records, or formal education systems, Vikings developed something modern preppers often overlook: resilient human memory systems that preserved critical survival knowledge across generations without losing a single detail. This wasn't simple storytelling or casual oral tradition. It was a sophisticated information technology that used distributed human memory as the most reliable storage medium available. Critical survival information wasn't entrusted to one person or even a small group. It was deliberately distributed across entire communities through specialized memory techniques that ensured redundancy and accuracy. One warrior might know the identifying features of medicinal plants, another their optimal harvesting times and locations, and a third their preparation methods and dosages. No individual held all the knowledge, but together, the community retained everything with multiple backup sources. Vikings used rhythm, rhyme, and melody as sophisticated error correction mechanisms that made forgotten or corrupted information immediately obvious. Critical information was encoded in sagas, songs, and chants, where the meter, rhyme scheme, and musical patterns made it impossible to remember incorrectly without breaking the flow. These knowledge songs contained hundreds of precise data points about navigation techniques, weather patterns, survival skills, and technical procedures. Physical spaces became memory devices that triggered specific information recall. The layout of Viking settlements, the arrangement of tools and household items, even the positioning of stones and landmarks served as physical reminders of complex information. The landscape literally contained knowledge. Walking through familiar areas would trigger memories of specific techniques, seasonal activities, or important procedures. Children were systematically incorporated into these knowledge networks through games, competitions, and daily activities that embedded critical information without feeling like formal education. A simple counting game might actually teach which plants were safe to eat and in what quantities. A singing competition might preserve the exact sequence for complex tasks like shipbuilding, metalworking, or navigation. Physical games taught spatial relationships, timing, and coordination needed for survival skills. The most sophisticated aspect was the built-in redundancy that ensured knowledge survival even during disasters. The same critical information would be stored in multiple forms, as a song, a story, physical arrangement, a game, and a practical demonstration, ensuring that even if one transmission method failed or key people died, others would preserve the knowledge intact for future generations. Underground root cellars, natural refrigeration. Vikings didn't have freezers, but they had something better: the earth itself. Underground root cellars provided consistent, near-freezing temperatures that kept food fresh for months without any external energy source, which was critical during the long, brutal winters they endured. These root cellars kept food for months when the winter prevented them from obtaining fresh food. These weren't simple holes in the ground. Viking root cellars were carefully engineered storage systems, typically dug 6 to 8 feet deep to reach below the frost line, where ground temperatures remained stable year-round. The excavation process required understanding local soil conditions, drainage patterns, and seasonal temperature variations. The walls were lined with stones to prevent collapse and provide thermal mass, while the floors were covered with sand or gravel for drainage. The stone lining wasn't random. Vikings selected rocks with specific thermal properties that would absorb and release heat slowly, helping maintain consistent temperatures even during extreme weather fluctuations above ground. Ventilation systems were crucial for preventing spoilage and maintaining optimal humidity levels. Vikings created air channels using hollow logs, stone tubes, or carefully arranged gaps in the wall construction. These systems allowed fresh air circulation while preventing warm air infiltration that could destabilize storage temperatures. The genius was in the temperature control. At depths below the frost line, ground temperatures hover around 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, perfect for food preservation. This natural refrigeration kept dairy products, preserved meats, root vegetables, and fermented foods fresh throughout the winter months. The consistent temperature prevented the freeze-thaw cycles that destroy food quality and safety. Some cellars included separate chambers for different types of storage, with specialized environments for various food categories. Dairy products required different humidity levels than root vegetables, and fermented foods needed specific temperature ranges for optimal preservation. Vikings created microenvironments within their cellars to accommodate these different requirements. The construction included sophisticated drainage systems that prevented water infiltration while maintaining proper humidity levels. Vikings understood that too much moisture caused spoilage, while too little dried out stored foods. They created drainage channels, used specific types of sand and gravel, and positioned storage containers to optimize moisture control. Access systems were designed for both convenience and security. Many cellars featured angled entrances that prevented cold air from settling in the storage areas, while heavy covers or doors kept out animals and maintained temperature stability. Some included multiple access points for different storage areas. Modern homesteaders and sustainable living enthusiasts are rediscovering root cellars as energy-free food storage solutions. A properly built root cellar can maintain ideal storage temperatures without electricity, making it both environmentally friendly and emergency-proof. During power outages or equipment failures, these underground storage systems continue working exactly as they did for Vikings 1,000 years ago. The construction techniques Vikings used, stone lining, proper drainage, controlled ventilation, are still considered best practices in modern root cellar design. Contemporary builders often reference Viking archaeological sites when designing modern root cellars, proving that these ancient techniques remain the gold standard for natural food preservation. Ice preservation, Viking glacier. Storage, Vikings living in northern regions developed sophisticated ice preservation systems that could keep food fresh for months without any modern refrigeration technology, using only their deep understanding of ice physics and thermal dynamics. They mastered techniques that modern preppers have completely forgotten, creating storage systems that rivaled modern freezers in effectiveness. Viking ice houses weren't simple pits or basic storage areas. They were carefully engineered systems using specific insulation materials, air circulation patterns, and thermal management techniques. Sawdust from particular wood types provided optimal insulation properties, while carefully designed ventilation systems prevented melting while maintaining consistent temperatures throughout the storage area. They discovered that ice harvested at specific times of year and stored using particular techniques could last through entire summers, even in relatively warm climates. The key was understanding ice density, air bubble content, crystal structure, and how different harvesting and handling methods affected long-term preservation quality. Winter ice cut during the coldest periods had different properties than ice formed during temperature fluctuations. Vikings also developed portable ice preservation systems for long journeys and expeditions, using specially designed containers with multiple insulation layers, often combining wool, fur, sawdust, and air gaps. They could transport frozen food across vast distances during summer travel. Some expedition records mention preserved fish and meat staying frozen for weeks during overland journeys in warm weather. The most sophisticated Viking ice systems included controlled melting chambers, where ice was allowed to melt at specific rates to provide fresh drinking water while maintaining food preservation temperatures in adjacent storage areas. This was complex thermal engineering using only natural materials, physics principles, and careful observation of how different materials and designs affected temperature control. Vikings understood that different foods required different storage temperatures and humidity levels for optimal preservation. They created multi-zone ice storage systems with varying conditions. Some areas for meat that needed to stay completely frozen, others for dairy products that benefited from slightly higher temperatures, and specialized zones for preserving different types of fish and game. Fermentation Mastery, Viking preservation, chemistry. Long before understanding bacteria, fermentation science, or food chemistry, Vikings developed preservation systems using controlled fermentation that could keep food safe, nutritious, and delicious for years without any modern equipment. Their techniques went far beyond simple pickling or basic fermentation, creating complex preservation systems that modern food science is only now beginning to fully understand. Viking fermentation chambers used specific temperature and humidity controls to create different preservation environments for various foods. They understood intuitively that different foods required different bacterial cultures, environmental conditions, and timing for optimal preservation results. These weren't random experiments, they were systematic approaches refined over generations. Skyr, the famous Viking fermented dairy product, could last for months without refrigeration, while actually becoming more nutritious over time as beneficial bacteria continued working. Their fermented fish preparations provided complete nutrition during long sea voyages when fresh food was impossible, and these preserved fish actually had higher vitamin content than fresh fish due to the fermentation process. Vikings also fermented grains and vegetables using techniques that created complex flavors, while extending storage life indefinitely. Their fermented grain porridges could be stored in sealed containers for years, providing emergency nutrition that was ready to eat without cooking. Fermented vegetables maintained their vitamin content through long winters when fresh produce was unavailable, preventing scurvy and other nutritional deficiencies that plagued other cultures. The most remarkable aspect was their understanding of fermentation timing and environmental control without any scientific instruments. Vikings could create specific flavors, textures, and preservation qualities by manipulating temperature, moisture, salt content, and bacterial cultures through careful observation and environmental management. They knew exactly when to start fermentation, how to control the process, and when to stop for optimal results. Vikings developed specialized fermentation vessels made from specific materials that enhanced the process. Certain woods imparted beneficial compounds, particular clay compositions provided optimal bacterial environments, and animal hide containers created unique fermentation conditions. They understood that the container was as important as the contents for successful preservation. Weather prediction, Viking atmospheric reading. Vikings developed weather prediction systems so accurate they could forecast storms, wind changes, and weather patterns days in advance using only natural indicators that modern meteorologists have largely forgotten. Their weather reading abilities often meant the difference between successful voyages and disaster, between adequate food storage and starvation during harsh winters. Viking weather reading combined multiple environmental signals into comprehensive forecasting systems. Cloud formations, wind patterns, animal behavior, atmospheric pressure changes detected through physical sensation, ocean swells, and even the behavior of smoke from fires, all provided information about approaching weather systems. Experienced Vikings could predict weather with remarkable accuracy that often exceeded modern forecasting. They understood that certain combinations of natural signs indicated specific weather patterns with high reliability. The behavior of seabirds, how high they flew, their feeding patterns, their calls, provided information about approaching storms hours before other signs appeared. The way smoke moved from fires indicated wind changes and pressure systems. Even the sound of distant thunder provided data about storm direction, intensity, and timing. Viking ships carried specialized weather readers who could interpret atmospheric conditions and make critical navigation decisions based on predicted weather changes. These weren't casual observations. They were systematic readings of dozens of environmental factors that together painted detailed pictures of coming weather patterns. This knowledge often determined whether ships continued voyaging or sought immediate shelter. The most sophisticated Viking weather prediction involved understanding regional patterns and seasonal variations specific to their geographic areas. They developed location-specific forecasting knowledge that was incredibly accurate for particular fjords, coastal areas, and ocean regions. This local expertise was passed down through generations and constantly refined through practical application. Vikings also understood long-term weather patterns and seasonal cycles that helped them plan agricultural activities, voyages, and resource management. They could predict harsh winters, early springs, and unusual weather years in advance, allowing communities to prepare appropriately for challenging conditions. Hot stone, bed, warming, medieval heating pads. Vikings turned ordinary stones into personal heating systems that provided hours of warmth throughout the coldest nights. This technique went beyond the hearthstones. It was about creating portable, personal heat sources that could warm beds, bodies, and specific areas as needed. The process started with selecting the right stones, smooth river rocks or dense granite that could absorb and hold heat without cracking. Stone selection was critical because the wrong type could explode when heated, creating dangerous projectiles. Vikings developed expertise in identifying safe heating stones through generations of trial and error. The heating process required careful temperature control. Stones were placed directly in the fire or on specially designed heating platforms that allowed controlled heat absorption. The timing was crucial. Too little heating provided insufficient warmth, while overheating could crack the stones or create burn hazards. These stones were heated in the fire until they reached optimal temperature, then carefully removed using wooden tools or leather wrappings. The removal tools were specially designed for this purpose. Long wooden tongs, leather slings, or metal implements that allowed safe handling of red-hot stones. The hot stones were placed in leather pouches, wrapped in wool cloth, or enclosed in wooden containers to prevent burns while maximizing heat transfer. The wrapping materials were chosen for their insulating properties and burn resistance. Thick wool provided gradual heat release, while leather offered durability and water resistance. Placed under sleeping furs or against the body, these heated stones provided localized warmth that lasted 4 to 6 hours. Unlike fires that heated entire spaces inefficiently, hot stones delivered concentrated heat exactly where it was needed most. They were particularly valuable for warming beds before sleep, or providing therapeutic heat for sore muscles and joints. Vikings developed sophisticated techniques for positioning heated stones for maximum effectiveness. Stones placed at the feet warmed the entire body through circulation, while stones positioned against the torso provided core warming that improved overall comfort. Some Vikings used multiple stones of different sizes to create graduated heating systems. The therapeutic applications were well understood. Hot stones were used to treat joint pain, muscle stiffness, and circulation problems that were common during long winter months. The controlled heat application provided pain relief and improved mobility, which was crucial for maintaining health during periods of limited activity. Safety protocols were elaborate and strictly followed. Vikings understood the dangers of burns and developed specific procedures for testing stone temperature, proper wrapping techniques, and safe positioning to prevent injury during sleep. These safety measures were passed down through generations and became standard practice. Modern science explains why this worked so well. Stone has excellent heat retention properties, releasing energy slowly and steadily over extended periods. The controlled heat transfer through cloth or leather wrapping prevented burns while maintaining therapeutic temperatures throughout the night. Contemporary versions of this technique appear in modern hot stone therapy, heated rice bags, and even some high-end camping gear. The principle remains sound. Dense materials heated to safe temperatures provide long-lasting, portable warmth that requires no ongoing energy input. Fermented food systems, probiotic winter nutrition. Vikings didn't just preserve food for winter, they improved it through controlled fermentation processes that created nutrient-dense, probiotic-rich foods that supported immune system health during the most challenging months. Fermented dairy products like skyr, similar to yogurt, fermented fish, and pickled vegetables weren't just preservation methods. They were nutritional powerhouses that provided essential vitamins, minerals, and beneficial bacteria when fresh foods were unavailable. The fermentation process actually increased the bioavailability of nutrients while creating natural preservatives that prevented spoilage. The fermentation took place in controlled environments, often underground cellars or specially designed fermentation chambers where temperature and humidity could be managed. These spaces were carefully constructed to maintain optimal conditions for different types of fermentation, with stone walls for temperature stability and ventilation systems for air quality control. Vikings understood that different foods required different fermentation conditions, and they developed sophisticated systems for managing multiple fermentation processes simultaneously. Fish fermentation required different temperatures and timing than dairy fermentation, and vegetable fermentation had its own specific requirements. The dairy fermentation process was particularly advanced. Vikings used specific bacterial cultures that were maintained and passed down through generations. These cultures were carefully preserved during winter months and reactivated each spring, ensuring consistent fermentation results year after year. Fish fermentation created products like fermented cod and herring that could be stored for months while providing complete protein and essential fatty acids. The fermentation process broke down proteins into more digestible forms while creating natural preservatives that prevented dangerous bacterial growth. Vegetable fermentation included cabbage, turnips, and other root vegetables that were packed in salt brine and allowed to ferment in controlled conditions. This process created vitamin C and other nutrients that prevented scurvy and other nutritional deficiencies during long winters when fresh vegetables were unavailable. The timing and monitoring of fermentation required extensive knowledge and experience. Vikings could determine fermentation progress by smell, taste, and visual cues, adjusting conditions as needed to achieve optimal results. This expertise was considered valuable knowledge that was carefully taught to younger generations. Modern nutritional science has validated the Viking approach. Fermented foods provide probiotics that support digestive health and immune function, crucial benefits during winter months when the body faces additional stress from cold exposure and limited food variety. The fermentation process also creates B vitamins, vitamin K2, and other nutrients that are difficult to obtain from preserved foods. The fermentation vessels were specially designed ceramic or wooden containers that promoted proper bacterial growth while preventing contamination. These containers were often buried or stored in temperature-controlled environments that maintained optimal fermentation conditions throughout the process. Contemporary fermentation enthusiasts, from artisanal food producers to health-conscious homesteaders, are rediscovering these traditional techniques. The methods Vikings used for controlled fermentation, temperature management, proper containers, timing, remain the foundation of modern fermentation practices. Norse cold storage, clay battery technology. Before refrigeration, Vikings mastered something modern preppers have completely forgotten: clay battery systems that could store cold, heat, and create preservation microclimates without any external power source or modern materials. These weren't simple pottery vessels. They were sophisticated thermal management systems that rivaled modern technology in effectiveness. Viking cooling vessels used double-walled clay construction with carefully calculated space between the walls filled with wet sand or crushed pottery. As water evaporated through the porous outer clay, it pulled heat from the inner chamber through evaporative cooling, creating refrigeration that could keep food fresh for days even in summer heat. Milk stayed sweet. Meat didn't spoil, and fruits maintained freshness, all without ice or electricity. But Vikings also created heat batteries using specially formulated clay mixed with crushed stone, metal filings, and sometimes ground bone for thermal mass. These were heated in fires until they glowed, then wrapped in wool or fur. The dense material released heat slowly and steadily for hours, keeping warriors warm during night watches or long sea voyages, when open fires were impossible. The most sophisticated Viking clay systems were preservation chambers, sealed vessels lined with precise mixtures of ash, salt, and specific herbs that created microclimates extending the life of seeds, medicines, and even certain foods. Some monastery records mention Viking-designed chambers, keeping seeds viable for decades, far longer than modern storage methods achieve. Vikings understood thermal dynamics in ways we've forgotten. They knew that certain clay compositions held heat longer, that specific sand types provided better insulation, and that the shape and thickness of vessels affected their thermal performance. Different regions developed specialized techniques based on local clay types and available materials. What made these systems genius wasn't just their effectiveness, it was their regenerative nature and complete sustainability. Unlike modern disposables that end up in landfills, Viking clay batteries could be reactivated thousands of times. A cooling vessel worked for generations. Heat batteries could be reheated indefinitely, and preservation chambers improved with age as the clay absorbed beneficial compounds from stored materials. What's remarkable is how accessible these techniques remain today. Whether you're interested in off-grid living, emergency preparedness, or just understanding how humans survived before modern conveniences, these methods offer practical alternatives that actually work. If you enjoyed raiding the past with us, then give a nod to your inner Viking, pillage that like button, and subscribe for more journeys into Midgard living.